Hey, one another couples, and welcome to another episode of One Another Marriage podcast with Dr. David and Teresa Mabry, where we seek to strengthen marriages for greater satisfaction and fulfillment and greater impact on the world around you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode. Today, we're going to be talking about conflict. And unfortunately, conflict is inevitable in marriage, but it does not have to be something you try to avoid at any cost, or it doesn't have to be something that you engage in like a pro wrestling cage match where ding, 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 there's a winner, right? There is a way to handle conflict in a much more productive and positive way. And in this episode, we will explore 5 skills that you need to resolve conflict in a positive way.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to this.
You are because you want to be a cage match?
With you.
Yeah.
With you. Yes. Let's wrestle.
Yeah. Why are you looking forward to this?
Well, I think because it's such a key topic for everyone. I think even for us, even as we were preparing for the podcast.
You think or you know?
I know.
He meant to say that it's a key topic for us too.
Yes. It's for us and for other couples. It's like, and as many couples as we coach and we speak to and we connect to on a regular basis, we know that, everybody listening out there has conflict in their relationships, but it's varying degrees. And so we're going to unpack all that today. And that's why I'm excited about the episode. And because with the two of us, we're not free from conflict. We just, and we're going to unpack that as well. But we have a really special shout out though.
We do.
They're all special, right? So not to minimize those that we've already done, but this one's special because it's our hometown.
Yes.
Presently. And hometown, we're going to use that loose definition because we don't want to slight at all our specific hometown, that's kind of we're kind of stuck. Our home is stuck between we can claim 3 or 4 hometowns because we're kind of we have no home, right?
Yeah, we do. What are you talking about?
Well, because we have a POW address.
Yes, we do have a POW address.
But Lewis Center is our hometown, but then Delaware we spend time in.
No,
and then the shout out that we're about to make.
We live in POW, hon. We have a POW address, so POW would be considered our hometown.
But technically, we're not in the city limits.
But it's our address.
The Postal Service is dictating.
Yes, but still.
We're about to have a conflict on this one.
Yes, we are. Yeah. We live in POW. I don't. This is.
No. There's your puzzle. I've done your puzzle for you because it's like the puzzle. I'll just share it as a puzzle. Is that we folks?
Okay, why don't you do the puzzle and I'll do the shout out?
No. Let me unpack this for everybody out there so you understand. We do. The Postal Service tells us that we have a POW city address, right?
POW, Ohio.
But we technically are not, we're across the river from POW. You don't enter into it. And so, but we're really not in Lewis Center. We're in a township is what we are. We're Orange Township is what we are. So anyhow, our shout out is this. The shout out is to Columbus, Ohio. Or maybe even better yet.
Which POW is like a suburb of. Okay.
So we are in the suburbs of the city of Columbus. We were not in the city of Columbus. Now our son and his wife and our granddaughter Sedona, they live in Columbus City, and but then our other son and his wife live in Delaware City, and things are growing so fast that it's kind of all grown together in a large part, but. We give a shout out to our many, many listeners in Central Ohio and specifically with those with a Columbus address. And we know that in the future, we'll give shout outs to some of those other cities that I've mentioned, like POW and Lewis Center and Delaware and so forth and so on. But we do want to extend the shout out to the southern part of Columbus. And there is a city there called Grove City. Grove City, Ohio is the home of the thenaz, which is a large church, a wonderful church down there. They're having us in, if you're listening to this on time, they're having us in this weekend to speak at their marriage conference. It's a one-day conference. And if you want information on that, it'll be in the show notes. Hopefully, if you listen to this before Saturday,
right.
October 16th. If you listen to it, click on that link, and maybe you could register if you're in the Central Ohio area, and you can come and hear us speak in the Columbus area. But shout out, thank you to every one of you, all the One Another couples that are in Central Ohio, Columbus, and Grove City. And we look forward to seeing you all in Grove City this weekend.
Right. Yeah, and when you say Columbus, I mean, when we're out and about and people are like, where are you from? We usually say Columbus. Then if they're familiar with Columbus, we break it down even further because there are a lot of suburbs around Columbus, and we do have a lot of listeners surrounding the Columbus area.
Yeah. I think that happens where most people, don't they? Like if you... or at least if they're kind of thinking through, if the further you go out from the place that you live, the larger your, hey, I'm from here kind of thing. Like if I told people, they say, where did you grow up? I say, West Mansfield, Ohio. And people are like, well, that means nothing, right? Because it's a little small town in West Central Ohio. But if I said I lived about an hour west of Columbus, Ohio, that's where I grew up, that means something different.
Yes. So that's the puzzle, right? I'll start now. So that's the puzzle, right? Is when you say our hometown, for you and I, our hometowns are not Powell. So when we say we're from our hometown, like it's in my brain, I go to where did I grow up? Because I think that's the way I look at it for most people. I think when you say what's your hometown, you go to not exactly where you're presently living, but the area that you grew up in. Now, for some people, that's still where they're living, right?
By the way.
And I grew up in a little community, a little town called St. Paris,
not
Ohio.
France.
Not France.
Thank you to the listeners, the One Another listeners in Paris, France.
Yes.
We've mentioned them before. Thank you very much.
So St. Paris, Ohio, and you grew up in West Mansfield, Ohio, and both of those are small communities. And usually when we talk with people, then we have to expand on the area around it and try to figure out if they know any of that, right?
Yeah.
So
I'd love to hear where other people are from. Like I see this on our stats, but boy,
go ahead.
I was going to say, it's like, so we on Facebook, folks, we have marriage coaching and our Facebook group, and you can request to join that, and we'll put the link in below in the show description. But share just randomly where you're from. We'd love to hear where you're from. If it's specific, if we haven't given you a shout out or whatever, say hello from. We'd love to hear from you.
Right. So I think part of the puzzle for me too is, where do our children say their hometown is? That's part of a puzzle for me, because I think each of them have a slightly different answer. They were all born in Alliance, Ohio. And then we moved and we lived in Springfield, Ohio. And then we moved here to Powell, Ohio. And so I feel like they each give a different answer. I feel like Alex and Taylor kind of say Springfield.
They're our oldest
even though they were 5 and 4 when we moved to Springfield. I feel like they say Springfield because we lived there for 7 years?
That's a great point.
7 years, I think it was.
And I'm staying silent because I'm thinking through your
I know, you're
thing.
processing.
So they were born in...
Nobody else can see your face. I can see your face, and I can see the perplexed. You look like that emoji that's got the one eyepiece, and they have, and they're stroking their chin, right?
That's right.
So they stroke their chin, and they have that
it's professorial.
That
yeah. And so Alex,
I think Gabe says Powell, or he says Columbus, because he was 8 when we moved here.
So they were born in 96, 97, and 2000. Those are the 3 years. And so based on that, we were in Alliance in the 90s and moved right after Gabe was born.
Yeah, well, he was 1 when we moved to Springfield.
Yeah. So we were in Springfield. So the children were at the ages by the time the 2000s hit, they were in Springfield. And then for us to move in 2008.
Yeah, but that's what I'm
Powell.
saying. Gabe was 8 when we moved here.
Yeah.
So I think he feels like this is kind of like more of his hometown, kind of where he grew up. And the funny thing is none of them say Alliance because they don't. Yeah. They have few memories, but we lived there much longer, and then we had our kids. So yeah. So there you go. Hey,
that's a good
those
one.
3 Mabry children. Once you're listening to this podcast, you need to comment to your parents. Where is your hometown? What do you consider your hometown?
That's funny.
Okay, there you go.
What is your hometown?
I know,
folks.
All right, so
that's a good puzzle, by the way. Thanks for sharing that. It is a good puzzle.
Well, thanks for prompting it because I had a different puzzle, and then when you threw in that whole mess about the shout out, got all discombobulated. So
yeah, I know.
All right,
I know.
All right, so let's get on into the episode.
Yeah, because we have a lot to cover, don't we?
We do. So questions to consider. As a couple, are you satisfied with how you settle conflict? What strategies and skills have worked for you? What strategies and skills have not worked for you?
Yeah, that's one to pause on, right? Because we're going to buzz right past it. It's like, that's a great question. It's like, what have you found that works? What have you found that does not work? And however long you've been together, like, so we know that there's some that may be listening that say, we don't have conflict. And that we have a problem with that statement.
Yes, you do.
Yes, you do.
Because conflict is just a disagreement. It can be a basic disagreement of opinion even. It may not develop into a very when people think conflict, a lot of times they're like, well, we don't have heated arguments or we don't fight. It may not develop into that, but there could be things like if you or I go to paint a room, we may discuss the paint colors, right? And there may be one that you prefer and one that I prefer, but it's not going to become this like cage match, like we said previously, over what color to paint the room. But we will, one of us eventually will just kind of like, yeah, okay. I mean, it's, and sometimes we choose a different color, but we talk about it a little bit more or whatever. But then there's going to be times where you're going to have some conflict and it's going to be about a specific thing that might have happened with your children, right? And one parent observed the other parent do something that they didn't exactly think that you went about it the correct way. And so later there may be a discussion in a different a different room later on. Yeah. And then we start to kind of like we're hurting feelings a little bit. Yeah. So that now we settled into a different kind of.
Yeah, I think a good example for the two of us, like a major conflict is we over our X amount of years being together was like major job change or move. Most of the time we've been of one accord, or at least there's been a process, which we're going to talk about these 5 things about.
Right.
And we're going to share some of the things we've done to resolve it in a positive way. Sometimes we've really been at odds with one another and there had to be a resolution, but it's a major issue. Like, hey, do I take this job like out of state, and do we move our family, kind of thing, and then the minor things all the way to we're going to represent. I appreciate how you unpack that. We're going to value and kind of let folks work through what would be minor. And so it would be the word wrestling comes in, even though you made a joke about the cage match.
Right.
Really the word wrestling works here for conflict because it's any time that there is a kind of a difference that would be wrestling back and forth. And it's actually a positive thing, a competition with one another. So that's what we want to head towards. What we want to offer though are five suggestions, skills, thoughts towards better conflict resolution, toward when you do wrestle with one another, what are some things that you can do. And I'm going to hit the first one right off the bat.
Okay.
And that is, don't avoid the wrestling. And the term, if you're keeping notes at home, folks, it's avoid avoidance. Avoid avoidance. So the top skill here that you need to have is, it is unhealthy to avoid conflict with one another, but you must deal with it. Now, this doesn't mean that you are aggressive. It just means that you say, you know what, we're going to deal with this. Now, we've said it before and we'll say it again. Learn to overlook minor offenses. But this is not so much that. It's more of saying, hey, learn how to work with one another. Don't avoid it when you do have a difference with one another, whether it's small, medium, or large.
Right. That's a good one, because avoiding never produces health. That it will always end in a negative manner. So yeah, that's a good one.
The best way there is just learn how to share when you, and a lot of times we find that individuals in relationships, they're not sure exactly how to not avoid. They're not sure how to, like, if I don't avoid this and I say something about it, I'm going to say it wrong. And so that's what we want to encourage you is, in the process of not avoiding, learn how to say it, be assertive, healthy assertiveness. Say what you want more, and listen to this, folks. This is a key statement. Say what you want more or less of in the relationship or in a specific situation. And if that were to change, how would that make you feel? So say it in such a way, though, that you're not accusatory, but you don't avoid it. Just be direct. And that'll connect into some of the other directions where we go. So number 1, avoid avoidance.
All right. Number 2 is going to be, make sure that you define the disagreement. Define the disagreement, because too many times we think we're really upset or arguing or having conflict over one thing, and the other spouse will be like, well, no, that's not what I'm upset about. Or so make sure that you define the disagreement. One of the key ways to do this is you always need to seek to understand before you're understood. And so ask the questions, like figure out, like, okay, where are you coming from on this? And explain to me why you feel so strongly about this particular solution or answer, right? And so we give opportunity for the other one to share in such a way. And a lot of times, if we can position ourselves in such a way to be listening and truly seeking to understand their position, that's helpful. But when both people are just like battling it out a little bit with staying real strong on where they're coming from, we miss what the actual disagreement is about. So making sure that you define the disagreement. Is the disagreement the color that's going to go on the wall? Is that the disagreement? Or is it about your choice never gets picked? Maybe that's what it's about, right? So one spouse always feels like they always give in.
They always acquiesce.
It's always the other one's preference, right? When we go there, that's a total different perspective to define the disagreement.
Yeah.
Because then we're going to, this isn't just about color, because it really doesn't matter whether it's gray or sky blue, but if it's, I'm always the one giving in, or at least their perception is that changes what you're actually disagreeing about.
When we work with couples, we talk about tools and making sure you have tools in your tool belt to turn to for the task at hand. And so many couples lack the tools. They have a conflict and they're like, I have to solve this, I have to fix it, I have to do something with what's in front of me. And they go to their tool belt and all of a sudden there's a tool missing. They don't have the equipment, or they pick up, what's the phrase is that when you're a hammer, everything's a nail.
Yeah.
And maybe you don't have a nail in front of you with this conflict. And so having the right tools, we we say on a regular basis to couples that there are two types of tools for conflict when you have conflict with one another. There are problem understanding tools, and then there are problem solving tools. Mm-hmm. And I appreciate that you bring up this number 2, is that define the disagreement and the seek that understanding, because oftentimes you need a problem understanding skill and tool to turn to, which is like that, what I mentioned earlier with, hey, this is what I want more or less of in the relationship. And then the listener is going to be like, oh, I never realized.
Right.
It's like I wish I would like to make the choice on the color for this because that would make me feel valued. Mm-hmm. That could be a simple one to work with. But a problem understanding is you really seek to understand where your partner is coming from. And that's a tool in your tool belt. It doesn't mean that you have to agree with that. It means that you are seeking to understand that. So when you define the disagreement, then you're like, oh, I understand where they're coming from. And you folks, you don't have to prove that you disagree or that you're right in that situation. Sometimes it's just showing or trying to help your partner, loving your partner by saying and come to a point with, you know what, I get where you're coming from on that. You don't have to follow it up either with, but I totally disagree.
Right.
But,
yeah.
But problem understanding can go a long way, right?
Yeah. Yes, problem understanding is critical and key. And I think that's a lot of the times when we understand, a lot of times it solves itself, right?
Yeah.
It's the rest of our list here. That's when, okay, we understand each other's perspective, but we still have this disagreement that we need to solve. And it really could be the color of the paint on the wall, or hey, we need some new appliances. But how are we going to work this into the budget? And one person's feeling we don't have the money for it, and the other one's like, no, technically we do, and let's look at this here. So
I think if I could bring this example up, we talked about it right before the podcast.
Dude, I'm an open book. So if you know anything about us,
that's right.
I'm good. All
well,
right.
and I think this really played.
Hit me with your best shot. That's what I'm going to say.
Pat Benatar, go.
I know. Hit me with your best shot.
If I can get Teresa Mavry to sing every podcast, it would make me happy.
I haven't done it in a while.
Just love it.
I
know.
Well, see, that's an area of conflict because you were like, are you going to sing this time?
Okay, let me make my point then.
Okay, what?
This? Okay, so because this is point 2 and we have 5 total. Okay, seeking to understand and defining the disagreement.
Yes.
In our negotiation over, because we shared with everybody that we got a new puppy, and we're excited to have our puppy, and more on that later. But early on, I've always wanted a German Shepherd, and that was part of our negotiation process.
Yes.
And you weren't a fan of getting a German Shepherd.
No.
Now, I grew up with German Shepherds a little bit more, and so you've had a poor experience with German Shepherds, and also your perception. And folks, don't write in and tell us your perspective on German Shepherds. That's not the point. Yeah. The point is, and that's funny because
as a child, yes, I had a fear of German Shepherds and Dobermans.
So defining the disagreement for us, I could have pushed so much that I'm like, no, I'm getting, and then coming home with a German Shepherd puppy, which would probably cause major issues in our marriage.
Yeah.
But I was really, and to be honest, I'm disappointed not to have a German Shepherd, but my disappointment pales in comparison to my better understanding of the exact defining the disagreement, which was to seeking to understand your perspective, and your perspective was that the fear or the discomfort with that breed of dog. And I had to ask the question, and let's go back to the last 2 podcasts that we had, by the way, to Love Busters. But I had to decide whether I was going to truly understand your perspective or whether I was going to seek my own selfish fulfillment, right? if we were on the same page with that, it wouldn't be selfish because it'd be shared like, hey, yes. But to define the conflict between us, the conflict wasn't necessarily getting a dog or not. It came down to fear and anxiety that surrounded a specific breed.
Right.
And it's important for me to honor you by setting aside. That's not something would be worth like, oh, well, honey, if you just deal with it, or just why don't you get counseling for that or whatever.
I need to be comfortable with the dog.
Yep.
And especially there's times where I'm the one that's here and you're not. And so I didn't want to live in fear in my own house.
And that goes to number 3, by the way. Mm-hmm. That's a good segue, because both of us, the third one would be own it. At the point of conflict, and a healthy conflict includes an ownership for your part in the conflict. So for this one, if we carry that illustration a little further,
sure,
to take responsibility for your part, each of our parts, as the offended or the offender, or whatever perspective on the issue. For me, I own my part of desire to get a German Shepherd, but own the responsibility to protect you and to protect you even for myself, as we talked the last couple episodes of setting aside my selfishness. And for you owning it, and I don't put words in your mouth and you can clarify this, but you owning the specific definition of the disagreement, owning your part of saying, I embrace who I am, I understand who I am when it comes to that breed of dog and my comfort level, and I know this causes David to lose out on something that he wants. And then I'm owning the part of saying, I recognize that I need to sacrifice for Teresa, and she needs to be comfortable with whatever breed we have. So there needs to be a high level of ownership in a positive way for how we contribute to the challenging circumstance, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I was also trying to think through the owning of it. I think one part of the owning of it too was just making sure that I was trying to be as healthy in my assertiveness to say, this is why I'm not as comfortable with this particular breed of dog. Like, we've joked for many years about, well, one of these days I'm going to get a German Shepherd. One of these days I'm going to, and then we're finally here where we've been discussing a dog now for over a year. And, but finally it was kind of like, no, all joking aside, like this really is, this is a tough one for me. But I needed to be able to say that in a healthy way and in an assertive way, so that you would hear me and understand. And to
press this further, once again, maybe I said this, but just to be clear, I had to own what the anxiety I was causing you by pressing in on getting this specific breed.
Right.
The part you were owning is, I know I'm asking David to sacrifice
something that
his
he's always
preference,
wanted.
something he's always wanted.
Right.
And that's right. And both of us, to be honest, I don't want to overplay this word, but hurt or that burdened us enough that, because we weren't being flippant with each other of like, well, it's her fault. I mean, I don't go to friends and say, well, Teresa's the killjoy.
Yeah.
I would have a German Shepherd if it weren't for her. And you're not going to friends and saying, I don't know, David's being abusive because he wants to get a mean dog.
Yeah, no.
I don't know.
No. Oh, and I think part of the owning it too, which you just brought up, was until I was really having that like healthy assertiveness of, listen, I need to share this with you in a calm manner, because up to that point, I will own my stress responses, which was not helpful when this topic kept coming up. So every time the topic of a dog came up, I was willing to look at a lot of other dogs, but then it always went back to the German Shepherd. And as soon as it would go back to the German Shepherd, then that's when my skunk, my stress animal, came out a little bit more, right? Or my gorilla. And so I own that.
By the way, shout out to the podcast from Stress Animals. Right. Go back and listen. I forget what number it is, like 3 or 4 or something like that. I know, it's early on. It was early on.
So I was owning that. And then once it was like, okay, I need to have more like clear communication without all this emotion, then it was like, I need you to understand my perspective of this, call it an irrational fear if you want. I know we have many friends who have German Shepherds and they are lovely dogs.
Yes.
It is just, it's me. And so that was what I owned out of it.
And because we are one and not individuals, like, in other words, we aren't just individuals who happen to share space. We chose to be married. We're going to make this decision together. So just to review, number one, for healthy conflict management, the 5 areas. Number 1, avoid avoidance. Number 2, define the disagreement. Number 3, own it. Take your responsibility for your part. And then the 4th one?
Yeah. So the 4th one then is, okay, so once we have this definition of what the conflict actually is, we understand it. We both have shared how we both contribute to the conflict. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to present options. Okay, we're going to present options. So this is going to be a conversation going back and forth of, this is the option that I prefer, and which do you like best? And then asking, this is the option that I like, but I can see your option also works, which one do you prefer? And you kind of start negotiating back and forth between the best option between the two of you. And what that does is it sounds very like tedious at times, and it sounds like it could be more of like it's like you're signing a contract. In a way, you kind of are, because one of the things that we encourage couples to do is write down options.
And for many couples, they may be listening thinking, that's so unrealistic, but folks, hear what Teresa's saying. If you really hear through the process of negotiation, if you've already done the hard work of defining and really understanding your partner's heart, then what Teresa's unpacking can work. It's a problem-solving skill. Problem understanding skill we've done. Now, a problem-solving skill is actually, as Teresa said, laying out the options and then saying, of those options, this one I like the best.
Right.
What about you?
Right. So that's where, writing it down, if you need to do that, do it. That's fine, because it actually, it's that whole concept of when we go to solve conflict, once again, we have to be in our thinking part of our brain. And we've talked about that before too, and moving your chairs into the thinking part of your brain. And so sometimes the act of writing things down is very helpful, because it's causing you to pause and to think in a more cognitive manner, so that the emotion behind, which is where a lot of people get caught up in conflict, right? Is we allow emotion to override logic for the most part. And so writing them down and then having a discussion to say, okay, well, this is the option that I prefer out of all of them. And then throwing the question back, which one do you prefer? Or do you have another one? And then they basically go back and forth and they present options back and forth to each other. And there's going to be some options that are just going to be silly, and that's okay. You can, both of you could just be like, yeah, no, that's, that one's not going to work. But you basically negotiate back and forth. to find the best solution.
Yeah, and so it's thinking through and working as a team. And then this, honey, it strikes me that this is a sliding scale based upon the intensity of the issue. So in other words, if it's where are we going to have dinner tonight, we don't have to write out all those options, and we don't have to. It depends on how high maintenance your spouse is with dinner, but it could be that you are. It could be okay. This is how we handle it. Hey, hon. For dinner tonight, it may be like 4 p.m. Hey, for dinner tonight, we don't have plans yet. Here are the options I've considered. And these are terms that we would actually use.
Yes.
Here are the options I've considered. That new Mexican place is open, Mexican restaurant. I'd be willing to try that. Door dashing, Bob Evans, because I've kind of been thinking about that. And also we have those pork chops in the fridge that probably need to be eaten. Those are the options I've considered. The one I like the best is that we would DoorDash Bob Evans tonight. Which do you prefer? And that's basically, so for that, it can just be verbalized.
Yes.
For a more, and then the riff to play that one out, how would you respond to that if that is our conversation with like restaurants?
Yeah, well, depending upon the day, I could just look at you and say sold, and like, and that's it. But most of the time, it's I think we should just go ahead and fix the pork chops because we don't want them to ruin, and that's wasted money. And so, the option I like best is, hey, let's go ahead and grill out the pork chops, and we'll throw on a veggie with it, and we'll just stay in.
Yeah, yeah. And it also could include, just to give the full meal deal, for not to use the meal, no, is that a pun?
I don't know.
But it could be like, hey, you know what? I don't know about DoorDashing Bob Evans, but can we DoorDash Mexican from the restaurant that we typically like to go to for Mexican, not the new one? That's those options. So you see how that works on that scale. Now, for a larger issue, like the selection of a dog, it could be, and then we'll break this down in the simplest form. It may not have happened exactly like this, but over time, the negotiation, Teresa, we already come to the conclusion we're getting a dog, or that we're moving towards getting a dog. The breeds I've considered are German Shepherd, for sure. I love German Shepherds. I would love to have a German Shepherd. Grew up with German Shepherd, blah, 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 and lay it open. And then another option is I see that these labs are good dogs, and I think they would fit with our personality, so forth and so on. Then the Labradoodles our work. So, and then I would maybe list a couple more just to be more deliberate. The one I like the best is German Shepherd, but what options have you considered? And that's when Teresa would come back with.
Yep. And I would say, well, the options I like best are, I would do like a golden retriever or a golden doodle. I could do a lab. And I could do a medium-sized dog. I could do those Aussie Shepherds or something like that.
Which is not an option that I had on a list, but which actually, this is funny because that idea actually came up and I hadn't thought of it.
Right.
So I came back, I did research on that.
Right.
And then we landed on.
We landed on that we would, because originally we were thinking of a purebred puppy.
Yes.
But then we actually negotiated again and landed on, let's look at some shelters and let's look at some rescue. And so at that point then, we knew what we were looking for was kind of like a medium to large dog, and trying not to have too much hair. And just making sure they weren't too hyper, because that really doesn't fit the lifestyle that we live right now.
Which all these things.
And so all of these things,
all these things you're listing are things that we negotiated.
We negotiated all of this down too. And so basically then it was just David would keep an eye on the rescue places nearby. We had filled out applications. And then as puppies came up or as dogs were coming in, he would send me different pictures. And that was how we continued to negotiate and found our dog.
And so one of the primary points with this is that you're presenting options to one another and not just making demands of this is the way I want it.
Right.
I don't understand why you don't see it my way. Rather than doing that, really think through, knowing your partner and yourself, here are the options I've considered. Which do you, this is the one I like the best. Which do you prefer? And then negotiating that best option. And that leads us to the fifth and final suggestion for today for working through healthy conflict resolution. And that is work together on a mutually agreed upon solution. So once you avoid avoidance, define the disagreement, you own your part in it, and then you present options and negotiate the best option between, you decide which option, and then that fifth thing, once again, you work toward that solution together, and then you celebrate and reward one another when you achieve it. So in other words, our dog has arrived, and we celebrate having our puppy here, and we work together as a team on working out that ebb and flow of caretaking for this this Pyrenees lab mix that we landed on.
Yeah.
That is beautiful.
Pyrenees was never in it, but wow.
Yeah, we didn't expect it, but we did want a large dog. She's large. And then that's if things work out. But if things don't quite work out, the second point with that would be, as you work together on a mutually agreeable solution, you adjust and recommit when you're off the mark from a solution. And so we have found ourselves that we've seen that maybe we tried a solution and it didn't work, and we had to come back around and say, let's adjust. We didn't get down on ourselves, but we worked as a team.
Mm-hmm.
We worked as a team.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so that's really the best statement in there is that you have to commit to being a team with all of your conflict. You've got to commit to resolve it as a team. And as painful as it is for some people to even give their preference or speak up their mind, you have to remember, if you have a spouse that really struggles with avoiding,
mm-hmm.
where they don't want, or the pleasing, they just want to make sure, it's so important that you help them to be able to have a voice,
mm-hmm.
and to use that voice to give input.
Yes.
And there could be one of you that really does carry more of the water on this, but as a team, it's still you need to be helpful to that other spouse. And then if there are two of you that have no problem speaking your
mm-hmm.
mind or speaking your piece, and that you're not avoiders in any way, you really have to work together as a team to make sure that each one is being heard and understood, so that you can come and resolve that conflict.
Yeah.
Make it a goal and a skill set that you can be proud of. That the question that we asked at the beginning of what are some tools or skills that you've used that have not been productive, and having a cage match or a yelling match with each other a lot of times is not productive.
Yeah.
Or one person always getting their way. That's not productive. So make sure that that you're working, commit to resolving conflict as a team, make it a goal and a skill set that you can be proud of.
Mm-hmm.
So once again, those 5 areas, those 5 skills: avoid avoidance, define the disagreement, own your part, present options, and then work together on the mutually agreed upon solution.
We really believe that when you are doing these 5 things earnestly, you have a one another marriage, a mutually beneficial reciprocal relationship. And that's our heart, is that you learn how to love one another, serve one another, touch one another, encourage one another, have peace with one another, that love step. We really appreciate you taking time to join us this week for this topic specifically, in fact. And we hope that you choose to join us again in a future podcast as well. Hey, can we send you with the verse of the week? It's found in Romans 14:13. And it says this has to do with conflict resolution, Romans 14:13. So let's stop condemning each other. Decide instead to live in such a way that you will not cause another person to stumble and fall.
That's a good verse.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, thanks so much for listening and joining in with us again. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and review, especially on the Apple Podcast or whatever platform you're listening from. Once again, if you have found value in this content, hit that share button. Help other couples to be strengthened as well. And we look forward to seeing you and having you join us next week.
Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye.